Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to another episode of the ABAP Freak Show. So, in this episode, we're going to go back to our ABAP roots because just a few days ago, the latest release, the 2005 release of the ABAP environment for the SAP Cloud Platform, or more commonly or affectionately referred to as Steampunk, was made available. And as you see here on my screen, I've got pulled up a blog from Florian, which I'll link to in the show notes, where he detailed many of the great new features that have just become available. And as we'll see here, if you want to try these out, you can go to the SAP Cloud Platform trial environment, where we have the ABAP runtime available, and many of these things you can give a spin for yourself. I thought it might be interesting today to not repeat everything that Florian listed here in the blog or is available in the release notes, but let's pull out a couple things to take a little deeper look at. It might be fun to play around with a couple of these items and make you aware of a few of the highlights. Well, let's start looking here at the various new features, and we'll begin right here at the top with the new ABAP language features. We see some new capabilities around call transformation, specifically the call transformation ID, and the ability to serialize and deserialize ABAP objects. Now, there's a little history here, particularly with the ABAP on the SAP Cloud Platform, where not all the transformation capabilities were initially available. They weren't whitelisted. Over time, more and more of those things have become available. But in this particular, we're talking about not doing a transformation on an ABAP data object, an internal table or a variable, but on an ABAP object instance itself. So I've prepared a little sample where we can play around with this. Let's go ahead over into the system and have a look at this. So first of all, just to maybe refresh, now this has been possible for a while now, but let's first begin with the simpler approach, which is to take an ABAP data object, an internal table in this case, and convert it using the call transformation. And what this example application is doing, just selecting from a database table into an ABAP internal table, and then we are going to use a call transformation ID to put that into a XML writer. So it's going to first convert it to XML, and then convert it to JSON. And then we'll just output that JSON to the console. So we can see basically we're going from ABAP to JSON. So we'll go ahead and run this. And what we see here, our ABAP internal table with the flight records now converted to JSON. So you can see the power of the call transformation statement, the ability to prepare data, particularly for exchange with external systems. Like I said, that's not that feature in and of itself is not new in this latest release. What is new is the ability to transform entire ABAP object instances. So I've prepared another example here. Let me just clear that out. And what we want to do this time, instead of reading data into an internal table, is we want to create an instance of a class. And I'm just reusing this OO tutorial class, where it's pretty straightforward. We're passing into the constructor the keys of a record. Once again, for the flight table, in the constructor, we are looking up that data. And in this case, we're storing it in a public attribute. Got a couple other attributes here. We've got a attribute with a default value and a little string table that's initial, just so we can have some stuff to look at in this class instance. And what we want to do here is we'll start with the same thing. We'll go ahead and create an instance of the class, and then we will transform that into an XML writer, which in turn we will turn into JSON and then output the JSON to the console. So let's go ahead and run this one. Oh, I've got a breakpoint left in there. That's okay. We don't need to quite look at that yet. We'll come back. We'll just continue on, and what you see here is we see the object, its reference ID, and then we also see the data in here as well. So the flight attribute, the test attribute, and the test string table attribute as well. So we were able to take the object, its public attributes, convert them to XML, and then ultimately also thereby convert that to JSON and then output that. So that's the first part of what's new here. Maybe let's back up. We'll keep the logic here to do the JSON part, but what I actually want to do is I want to switch this over so it's a little easier to see in the debugger. Let's go ahead and just put this into an XString instead of putting it into this JSON writer. And by putting it in an XString, we'll be able to look at the XML that it's taking it to first via the debugger. So let's just start there. Let me activate my change, and let's run this again. And what we see now in the debugger, here's our instance of our class. There we are. And we can see the data that's in it. And then if we step one step forward, then we see our JSON out is an X string. And when we look at that in the debugger, of course you can say how you want to show it in the debugger. And I've said, okay, show it to me in the XML viewer. There's also the HTML viewer that would have worked too for the X string in this case. But let's look at it in the XML viewer. And we see basically the same information. The class has been converted, and we see the attributes here as well. Now, where this gets really interesting, we can both serialize the object instance, but we can deserialize it as well. What I want to do here is I want to take the same object instance, and I'm going to serialize it, so then it's just an XML representation as the X string. Let's go ahead. And then I'm going to go ahead and clear the initial object instance, and then I'm going to create another object, just type ref to object, and then we can do a call transformation on it. Starting now, the source is the XML, and then we're going to deserialize the XML and restore it back as an ABAP object. So let's have a look at this. Activate it. And do we have enough breakpoints here? Let's do one more there. And let's go ahead and run this. And we've stopped on the first one. We see how our object instance, UA0058. Now this is important. Look at this object instance number, 108. Every ABAP object instance, when you look at it here in the debugger, you can see that it has an instance number associated with it. Okay? That's going to be important here in a second. Now let's go ahead and go to the next step. So we've transformed it. If we look at our JSON out, we see that, yes, that same object instance number, 108, the data, it's all here in the JSON out. So serialized to an X string. Now let's go one step further. We have created the context 2. It is an initial object instance of type ref to object. We have cleared our UA0058, so object instance number 108 is gone. Should be have been garbage collected by now because we cleared the only reference to it. We still have a representation of it in XML, but that's not a true object reference. That's just a serialized representation of the data that was contained in that object reference. And if we go forward one more step, we'll do the call transformation to restore this back, and we have restored it back into context 2. which context2 now has a completely different object instance ID. So we can't just go and get the original object instance ID. It's gone. What we've done here is we've created a new object instance, but of the same type. We've restored the type, CCL 00 tutorial 5, and we have restored the data back into it. So we look at the flight. All the data has been restored back, the test, and the string table. So very, very cool. We were able to destroy our object instance, but then restore it back from the serialized version of it. Now the thing to be aware of here, I want to do a little experiment. I wonder what happens here. I have a feeling I know what happens, but let's take our variable. Actually, let's take our flight variable and see what happens here. Let's take this and let's move it to the private section. I have a feeling that once the attribute is private instead of public, it's no longer going to be serialized. But let's just have a look there. All right, let's go ahead and now, Yeah, I did activate that. That's good. And let's go ahead and execute this. And right away here. Now, if we look at our UAA5, yes, we see our flight is now private, the little red dot. Let's move on to the next step. We've done our transformation. Let's look at our output. And, well, actually, that's interesting. It did serialize the private attribute as well. I was not sure that it would do that. I wasn't sure that it would be able to see that, but that's cool. And if we step further, we have cleared the UA058. We've got our context2 as initial. We still have our serialized version. Let's go one more. And we've restored back. Yeah, now we have restored back context2, and it has even restored back the private attribute. Okay, I was not sure it would do that. I seem to remember in the old days you were able to do some serialization in class, but I didn't think it could do private. So maybe that's an improvement from years ago. Maybe I'm just not remembering right, but that's also very cool that we're getting a true state of our object back. So that's a safe thing to do there. Now, one last thing I want to try out here. Let's go ahead and get to a point where we're done. Let's just resume processing. Yeah. I'm also kind of curious. I'm pretty sure I know what would happen here. Well, instead of the generic type, let's put this back to the specific type. And then let's see. I'm sure this will work, but I just want to prove to you. Right. Context2. Yeah, that should work. Get flight details. So let's call a method of the restored version of the class, and then we should get the output to the console. And let's activate that. And go ahead and execute. And once again, we'll serialize it. We'll clear the initial version. It is gone. We have the context2, which is also initial. Now we've restored it back, and now we're calling a method of the restored version. And we'll go ahead and continue there. And if I hadn't put all my breakpoints in, there we are. It's done, and we've output the version. So we see we are able to serialize the object instance, destroy the object instance, but then restore it back after it's been destroyed and still operate on it. And that's pretty cool capabilities. I would imagine there's all kinds of things you could do there, maybe with storing the serialized version in a database, for instance, and being able to restore the state of the class back. in between calls of in a stateless kind of scenario, or between service calls, things like that. That's how I've used the serialization approach before, but now being able to do it on the class level as well. Very, very nice feature. Okay, the next feature we want to look at, there's so many to choose from, but I pick out a few that really piqued my interest. And the next one was the new workflow APIs. Let me see if I can, where is it here? Yeah, reuse services. Support for starting and managing SAP Cloud Platform workflows via an API. And it links over here to all the details for this particular API. I like this one. I've done some work with the workflow integration in the past. Obviously, one of the values of being on the SAP Cloud Platform with the ABAP environment is the ability to easily consume other services of the Cloud Platform, even if they aren't part of the ABAP runtime. And that's exactly the kind of scenario that we have here with the workflow integration. The workflow is available as a separate service on the Cloud Platform and available to all the various runtimes and languages that you can execute on the Cloud Platform. For instance, I was doing some stuff the other day where from a Node.js Cloud Foundry application, I was interacting with the workflow service as well. Now, the thing about in the past with the ABAP integration, we were having to use like the low-level HTTP API calls to interact with the REST endpoint of the workflow service. That's good. I mean, basic integration, we were able to do authentication, but we kind of had to work at a rather low level with the workflow APIs. And what SAP has done is now provided a very nice API layer within the ABAP environment. So from a class, we can interact with the workflow service without the need to drop into making our own HTTP request and setting the headers and things like that. And as you'll see here, it gives us access to a lot more than the ability just to trigger workflows. I mean, that's certainly the example here from the help documentation is to get an instance of a workflow, start the workflow, pass some data to it, and then a callback class, which will be initiated when the workflow is completed to give us any result data back. Now, one thing I will say, a little disappointing here. I prepared an example of this. But I will say up front, as we'll see here, you can't fully do it in the trial system, and it makes sense why. I'll show you here. As you start to do the setup, actually I want to go back here a second. It says right here, to execute the integration, you need to have set up the workflow integration, which takes us over to another help link. Where we create a communication arrangement, which makes sense. We don't want to be hard coding the connectivity parameters to the workflow service. It's actually a relatively simple process to create a communication arrangement from the service key of our workflow service. You go get that service key through the Cloud Cockpit, and then you create a communication arrangement. You give the communication arrangement that service key, and it does most of the technical setup for you. It's really quite nice. The major problem that we have in the Cloud Platform ABAP trial is that because it's a shared environment, I'm not the only user on this system, I don't have access to the communication arrangements. So normally what you do here is, if you're working in the ABAP development tools in Eclipse, is you could come here to ABAP development. You could open the system URL, which is going to take you to the Fiori Launchpad for your system. And if this was an ABAP in the cloud instance that was not the trial, I would have more access here if I was a developer. I would have the communication arrangement options, and I could create a new communication arrangement. Because this is the shared trial and we're all living together here, that access is not given. You can imagine the security problems of being able to call out to external systems and set up credentials, and then other people on the system could reuse those credentials. It would be a rather dangerous thing to allow in a shared free trial environment. So we're not able to fully set up the workflow connectivity here with the new API. But all the same, I decided to show this, one, because I think it's a very cool feature, and it shows where we're going here with the integration of more of the cloud platform services directly into the ABAP runtime environment. And although if I execute this, go ahead and execute this now, you'll see no communication arrangement found. Yes, of course, because I wasn't able to create the communication arrangement. But in this case, the main thing I want to show you here is it's very easy to use this. We just created an API instance. Gets this instance to the workflow API itself. And in this case, I was going to get the workflow definitions. So the call to this method would have retrieved, it would have went out to the cloud platform, and for my workflow instance that I'm bound to via the communication arrangement would have returned all the various workflow definitions that are in that instance. Now we can see the different things here. We can get context data, we can get user task, workflow context, workflow definitions, which I was trying to get, the workflow logs, the current workflow status. We saw the example in the help for starting a workflow, or canceling a workflow. So the main thing I wanted to point out here is this is very full featured. It isn't just about kicking off a workflow and getting the results. The ability to get the logs, to get the definitions, would allow you to very dynamically interact with workflows as well. It's a little, I apologize that I can't show you the whole thing. Maybe in a future episode I can set up a temporary productive instance of the ABAP system so that we have full access here. But I think it's pretty understandable why this isn't possible in the shared trial. But still, as I said, good to know that it's here, and it shows you where SAP is going as far as providing more of these types of wrappers and APIs for very easy consumption of the reusable services that we find in the SAP Cloud Platform. All right, and the last new feature that I want to focus on here today, like I said, there's many here that are listed, and I've pulled out just a few that caught my idea that I wanted to play with. It's actually this one, the introduction to the XCO Library. And it's an API that allows you to dynamically generate development objects. And this is something that's kind of in its infancy. There's still a lot more work that's going to be done here, but already this is a pretty cool thing. I mean, we've always had the ability to do some dynamic things in ABAP, the RTTI, RTTS, the runtime type information, dynamically inspect things. In the past, we would call maybe ABAP repository function modules to dynamically create development objects. I know I have some personal experience there in the past doing some things like that, building little external utilities. But the fact that there is a new API specifically designed to do this and do it safely, very cool, very exciting. But probably I'm kind of bearing the lead here, I feel like, because what this led to is this great generator utility by Andre Fischer, which just was recently released as well. And it uses this this new XCO API to dynamically generate wrap objects and all the pieces and parts, the CDS views, the projection views, the behavior definition, the behavior implementation, all these parts and pieces that sometimes feel like, oh, there's so many steps to getting started with wrap. I have my table. I really just want to get going and be able to do a one-to-one translation as a starting point, and then it can get interesting when you start doing manipulation of it. But there's a lot of work to get to that first step. And what he's decided to do here with this great little generator sample is allow you to give the name of a table or two tables, a header item relationship, and it will generate the starting point and all this stuff in the wrap for you, the CDS views and everything. It's not meant to do absolutely everything for you, but it takes away some of the manual steps and the tedium of the initial process, so that you can really focus on customizing these objects and your wrap implementation for your particular business needs. And I think this is a great feature, particularly for somebody who's done some teaching of wrap. This is I'm really looking forward to being able to put this to use in the workshop scenarios and educational scenarios, because it saves a lot of time, and we can get into really teaching the concepts of wrap without having to do a bunch of manual steps to begin with. So Andre has released not only example of how to do this, but he has released it to the SAP samples repository on GitHub. So you can clone this directly into your SAP Cloud Platform ABAP environment. Now, I've already done this in the trial system that we have here. So let me just go back and I'll show you. It was a really simple process. Basically, just clean up some stuff from my last demo. I created a new package, zwrap_generator. And then I came over here to the Git repository tab. I said link new ABAP repository. I put in the URL of the ABAP repository from the SAP samples site. Put it in here. And of course, I've already done it once, but the next step would have just asked me for what package do I want to target. And then it adds it here to the list. And we see it here. And then I was able to do a pull, and I can go ahead and do another pull. Not that there's going to be any changes to pull over, unless Andre's changed it in the last hour or two, since I pulled it into the system initially. But you see a pull is running, and the pull was successful. And I don't believe we can see if there's anything to reactivate. Well, there is some stuff there, isn't there? So let's come here to classes. Let's just reactivate them. Maybe there was some change. No, it doesn't look like there was change. So I should be good. But easy enough to do. Now, the only thing about using the trial, once again, it's a shared trial. And although I put them in this particular package, the class names come from the Git repository. And if somebody else has already done this on your particular instance of the trial, and keep in mind there's multiple instances of the ABAP trial. And if you so happen to get into the same instance that I'm in, I've already pulled this into this instance. And if you were to pull it again, it might tell you, oh, that's already bound to that Git repository is already bound to this other package. You don't need to pull it again. It's here. Or maybe you're in a system where nobody's pulled it yet, and you would have to do that. That's all because the trial is shared, right? Basically, let's go ahead and use what he put out here. So he's got the generator itself. This is the guts of what he wrote, and it does all the work to basically, you give it one or two tables, like his blog said, and it will inspect those tables, and then it does all the work to build the various CDS views and the behavior definitions and all that good stuff based upon what it sees in the data dictionary for your source database table. And then it uses these new APIs to create the ABAP repository objects. Now, to use the generator, you need to create a class, and he's created a little demo here that basically you just create an instance of his generator, and you give it the information like what the target package is, what the target namespace will be, and then what you want your table and entities to be named. And then we'll go about the process of doing the generation and outputting the the results. So we're really out on a limb here. I have not tested this yet. I imported all of this, but I have not tried it out just yet. So this would be interesting. Just go ahead and copy this. So I'm going to create my own. What I've got over here. So I've got another package here where I've got some tables. Let's just go here. I've got a business partner table, but all this is I only have the table, right? I have not created a wrap object for this. I've not created a CDS view or anything like that, but I do have a table here. Well, let's just go ahead and look at this. And I've got some data in this table. Yeah, that looks good. So let's, we're really going live here, aren't we? I'm going to create a new class. CL wrap gen demo TPJ wrap generator demo, and let's actually I had selected too much here. Let's I probably could have just brought all this over, couldn't I? Except for the name. Let's do that. All right, so I've brought over his example. Yeah, let's correct that name. There we are. There we go. And we're going to create an instance of the generator. Let's just do this for one table, just like his example. So we're going to use his generator, and we are going to go into my package. So it's going to put it here in zHANA7 package. The namespace of zwrap should be okay because my table names are pretty unique here. So the header table, let's name this zHANA7 VP. What do we want to call the entity name? Business partner. And header semantic key. Well, let's go look at that. What was our semantic key? Well, that would be partner ID, wouldn't it? Partner ID and the suffix. If we want to put a suffix on the end, I can see where this would be very useful for a workshop. Let's just put 01 on the end. And he has 4 numbers. I haven't read everything here. I probably should check to make sure. Does that really have to be 4 numbers or not? I don't know off the top of my head. Let's try that. I hope it works. Let's go ahead and activate that. And let's run it and see what happens. And it's running. The anticipation. Put exception. The parent entity requires a unique key. Source. Wrap business partner 1 does not exist or is not active. Okay, was not activated because it requires a unique key. I wonder what I did wrong there. I tell you what, let's troubleshoot a little here as we go, because what was interesting, I paused for a second to look at what was going on behind the scenes, but basically it did go ahead and generate a lot of stuff. We see our data definitions, our metadata extension, our behavior definitions, and if we look at, let's start here looking at this, and it requires a unique key. Projection on I does not exist or is not active. Of course, yeah, okay. Define root as select from. Yeah, I'm not sure why the parent entity requires a unique key. and I'm pretty sure I have a key. Maybe the table that I chose is not well suited. I'll just go ahead and activate this one. I want to see what it does. Yeah, maybe I get some more details. Yeah, the parent and entity. Requires a unique key. And now that seems to work okay. I don't know if there's something unusual about my definition, or because my structure is a little different. I don't really have a semantic key. I was using my partner ID as the technical key. Perhaps that threw it off. I'd have to maybe play around a little bit more, but it seems like, let me try to activate the rest of these objects now. Once I did that correction, of course, I could dig in here a little bit more and maybe find that I did something wrong, or there's something maybe slightly off with the generator, but still very cool that it did all this work for me to create the root view, which now does work. The data preview on the view, yes, does work. Very nice. And we see here the projection view. Exist or is not active, but it does. And did it not activate? Or it must be defined as a key field. Yeah, there's definitely something off with the keys here, aren't there? But already, even with a little bit of the problems that I hit here, it still did so much work for me. Even if I've got to go through and correct this one little thing with my key not being quite right, let me go back to my class. Did I misspell partner ID? Is that maybe partner ID? No, not maybe. ID. I don't know. Maybe there is something there with the way I did the semantic key. Yeah. But like I was saying, even if I have to correct a few things here, it still saved me tons of time. Look at the metadata extensions here with all the annotations very nicely. I just make sure this is. Need to activate the metadata extensions now. All right. All the annotations that are pulled here using labels, saves me the time of setting all this up. Once again, even if I would have to go in and edit a few things here, we have the behavior definitions. Which I could probably try to activate now as well. And I'm getting. And we have our the implementation projection here. So, like I said, I hit a few problems. Yeah. And because we're on here live, I did a little bit debugging. I don't want to go too much further into it. I have a feeling that maybe I did something wrong here with the key definition, but already you can see how much work that it did for me. Even if I've got to do a little bit more to get things in perfect shape, this is still really great. Saves me a ton of steps that I think sometimes are a little confusing to know which order to go in. And of course, as you see here, there would be a lot of typing to bring a lot of these views in, and the fact that it did it all for me. Now I could cut them down if I wanted to, trim them down, add associations, whatever else. I don't have to repeat all the columns and names. I at least have a great starting point. So maybe I have to play with that a little bit more offline later in the week and see if I can figure out exactly what was going on there with the key. But already I'm loving what I see here with the capabilities. So I hope that you have enjoyed this look at what's new in ABAP 2005. We looked at just a couple of the new features, but this is also, I think, what you're seeing with the quarterly releases to the ABAP environment in the cloud. You see how much faster innovation is coming. And maybe you're using an on-premise system still, you get a little preview of new functionality that could very well be coming down the line to the on-premise world where they get major releases once a year. But you see how we're able to both innovate faster in the cloud. We see examples of the integration that we have with other SAP Cloud Platform services, and we saw the great sample generator from Andre, which I think is a very useful tool for getting started with RAP, allowing you to focus on your specific logic and little changes you want to make to your RAP objects, rather than having to spend a lot of time up front defining the base views and all the columns in it and things like that. So huge time saver, and great work there to Andre. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the ABAP Freak Show. We bounce around between a lot of topics. Nice to get back to the ABAP roots here, like I said, and show you some new things. Next week, there will not be a show. I'm on vacation next week, a little staycation. Maybe I'll share some pictures of that on social media. But so join us again in 2 weeks for the next episode of the ABAP Freak Show.